well, he didn't keep us out forever. And here's what happens. The first thing is that, well, first off, let me just talk about the kind of war that World War I is. And it's known as total war. What does total war mean? Total war means whole nations against whole nations. Okay, so so the way that warfare had evolved through the centuries was that wars were fought by armies, and that the civilian population was off limits unless they got in the way. Okay, so so basically, then you have the two armies go out and they meet each other, and whichever army wins the war, and the civilians are left out of it. And that was kind of an unwritten rule. It was actually broken in the American Civil War by um, William Tecumseh Sherman in his March to the Sea, when his idea was that if if you if you wage war against civilians, that will prevent them from being able to support the troops, and that will end the war sooner. And so you can see then that when Sherman was marching to the sea, he was destroying plantations, he was destroying railroad tracks, he was destroying the ability of the civilians to support the war effort, which in turn prevented the army, the Southern armies, from being able to recover from their losses. And so this is going to be the first use of total war in the modern era. But the American Civil War had been a kind of experiment, a kind of a proving ground for the concept of war in the late 19th century. So the World War I was actually fought based on the lessons of the American Civil War. Okay, another place where we can see that is in trench warfare. Trench warfare was not something that was practiced until Robert E. Lee dug a bunch of trenches around Richmond and Petersburg in order to keep the superior Union troops from advancing. And that's going to be adopted then also in World War I. The thing about total war is that it's not two armies against each other, it's whole populations against each other. So for example, it's not just the Germans against the British, it's or the German army against the British army. It's all of the British against all of the Germans. So everybody, all the civilians in England are somehow involved in the war effort, and all the civilians in Germany also somehow involved in the war effort. And the whole war effort then is going to be against the other nation. And really what that does is it means that there aren't any innocent civilians, that it's the whole country at war. You guys are with me? And this is going to be the way that World War I is fought, okay? Before we go any further, I want us to think about how would that work in the United States?
Another country attacking us?
Well, how would it work for the United States for all of the Americans to be against all of the English or all of the Germans or all of the French?
It would be hard because there are so many loyalties in the United States because we're all immigrants from those places.
Exactly. So you could say that in a total war, there's you could say we're all British and we're all against the Germans, right? Which is kind of ridiculous because there's all kinds of mixing that always gone on, right? But in America, you couldn't say that because Americans identify with the place where they came from. I mean, even today, most of us will say, well, you know, my grandparents came from Norway, right? You see what I'm saying? So we always identify with that. We don't necessarily all, there isn't any such thing as an American nation in terms of ethnicity. You guys get what I'm saying? And so that's going to make it difficult for the Americans to get involved in this total war thing. And what will end up happening, the result of it is going to be that there's going to be backlash of Americans against other Americans. So, for example, Americans will target people with German last names, and they will basically, lynch them or run them out of town. And what will happen is, as a result of this, many people with German last names will anglicize their names. They'll change their names to something that sounds more English, essentially, and that will help them to stay kind of on the right side. But it shows this sense of otherness that can be created, which doesn't necessarily have anything to do with race. Because if you put a British and a French and a German standing next to each other, you wouldn't know who was who until they started talking. You follow what I'm saying? So you can create this sense of difference without even worrying about skin color. And what is the motivating factor? The motivating factor is fear. You're the other, and I'm afraid of you. You Germans are going to destroy us. Let me just show you this here, right? What do we see here? What do you guys see here? This is a recruiting poster from World War I. This is one of many. Okay, but what do we see in this recruiting poster?
An uncivilized representation of probably the Germans.
Okay, so we know you're saying that this gorilla is German?
I don't know. Maybe. I think so. Brute.
Well,
The helmet with the spike on it. So
yeah, it's got the Pickelhauber helmet, right? Also, I don't know if it's hard to see, but it's got culture with a K, right? Which makes it German, okay? But what's he doing?
He's landing on America's shores.
Right, so what do we see behind him? What is this?
The ocean.
Right, it's supposed to represent the Atlantic Ocean, and he's coming from, what's this in the background?
Europe.
Europe, right. And what's happened to Europe?
Looks like it's in shambles.
Right, he's destroyed Europe already with his culture club, right? And now he's coming to America, and then who's he got in his hands?
I'm having trouble hearing you.
Okay, I'm sorry. What can I do to help? Can you hear me now?
Sorry, that was Siri.
I'm sorry?
Sorry, I accidentally activated my Siri.
And that
Oh,
was the phone.
I can hear you.
well, tell your Siri to shut up, right? So anyway, so who is this gorilla holding?
Is that Lady Liberty?
Could be, or who else could it be? It could be your sister, your girlfriend, your daughter, your mom, right? Of course, nobody's mom dresses like that, but but you get what I'm saying, though, right? So who do you think this is appealing to?
The men.
The men, right? Because what is the job of the men? The job of the men is to, protect our women's, right? Okay, and it's encouraging people to enlist. What emotion is being called upon here?
Fear and anger.
Fear and anger, exactly. So fear and anger, and what this fear and anger does is it takes everybody that's German and turns them into gorillas. Why would they be gorillas? Why couldn't they just be people?
They're not the same as us.
They're not the same as us, but also what?
They're lesser.
Dehumanizes them.
They're not humans. And why do we have to make them not humans?
So we can justify killing them.
Exactly. You can kill varmints, you can kill monsters, but you can't kill humans. You can't kill your brother, right? In theory. Okay, you guys follow what I'm saying here? So this is going to be what really drives Americans toward supporting the war, and it also splits Americans. You're going to see in the United States a real backlash against German Americans during this period of time. All right. Well, anyway, So now moving on, the Russian Revolution. What happens is that Russia is going to be, actually, this isn't the best map. Let me show you the other map. Russia is going to be doing poorly in the war from the very beginning. What will happen is that that Russia will actually invade Germany, but the Germans will push back the Russian advance. And the only reason why they can't finish their conquest of Russia is because they're tied down here on the Western Front by the Western Allies. And in the meantime, the Ottoman Empire, what's left of the Empire of Constantinople, is going to join the war on the side of Germany. What that does is it cuts off the flow of goods to Russia from the outside world. The only way to get, the warm water port in Russia is right here in the Crimean Peninsula, which you can't see, but it's there. Okay, and if you close, the only way to get there is through this very narrow waterway called the Bosporus and the Dardanelles. And if you can't get goods through there, then Russia can't get goods from the outside. And when the war is progressing, Russia will experience crop failures, meaning that people are starving. And the Russians continue the war, but the people are starving, and that's going to lead to an opportunity for communists to rebel, to conduct a revolution against the monarchy. And the result of it is going to be that in 1917, there's going to be two different revolutions in Russia. The first one happens in March, and the March Revolution replaces the monarchy with a liberal democracy led by a guy named Alexander Kerensky. And if you want to know what Kerensky looks like, he looks like Herman Munster. So if you don't know who that looks like, then go look him up. He just doesn't have the bolts coming out of his neck. But Alexander Kerensky becomes the leader of this new liberal democracy in Russia. And that liberal democracy will last until October, which is really November in the Western calendar. You guys have heard of the movie The Hunt for Red October. Red October is when the Bolsheviks are going to depose Alexander Kerensky and take over this Russia as the Communist Party, the Bolsheviks, right? And we're going to talk more about them when we talk about the Cold War, okay? But for now, just understand that for a period of time between March and November, Russia was actually a liberal democracy, okay? You guys follow me here? Now, why would that be important?
We would see them more favorably.
Right, because what was keeping Wilson from joining the war on the side of the Allies?
They didn't like
Russia was a monarchy.
That Russia was a monarchy, and we didn't want to be allied with a monarchy, all right? So now, in the meantime, what happens is that the Germans see this as a great opportunity. Their idea is that they're going to launch an enormous offensive on the Western Front that will crush the Allies, and then they'll move their armies and take over Russia. Or actually, no, it was the other way around. They were taking their armies away from Russia and moving into the Western Front. Okay, the reason why was because when the Bolsheviks took over, they left the war. They left the war. So then there was this. They figured that in the meantime, what they could do is they could resume unrestricted submarine warfare. And their idea was that even if the United States did declare war, they could never get organized to send troops to Europe before the war would be over. That was their gamble, essentially. It turned out to be a bad gamble. But just to be sure, the German foreign minister, Arthur Zimmermann, sends a telegram to the Mexican president, Venustiano Carranza, suggesting that if the United States declared war on Germany, then Mexico should declare war on the United States, and that after the war was over and the Germans had won, that the Mexicans would receive all of the territory that they had lost in the Mexican-American War, which was Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, California, parts of Utah, Nevada, a huge area of land. In fact, half of Mexico, really. Okay, so now what happens is that the Mexican president never answers the telegram, but the telegram is actually intercepted by the British, and the British end up publishing it in the American press. And the American press, the Americans are going to become unalterably in favor of war against Germany. Americans are going to insist that the United States must crush Germany because they had threatened to take away American territory. And the Americans are like, how dare they threaten to take away this territory that we won, that we conquered fair and square, right? That we stole fair and square, okay? And so because of that, because of all these different things, now that Russia is now a liberal democracy, and because the people are demanding war against Germany, Wilson declares war. And the United States enters the war, and the United States actually sends troops to Europe, and those troops are actually going to make a difference, okay? And the reason why, again, was because the balance of power was so precarious that the introduction of this new fresh power from America is going to turn the war in favor of the Allies, and the Allies then start to push the Germans back, and the result of that then was going to be that the Germans would eventually realize they couldn't win the war, and they will negotiate a peace before the Allies enter Germany to prevent Germany from being destroyed.